Hey guys, welcome back to The Generalist. In this episode, I sat with a Cuban refugee who left Cuba right around the time where Castro came into power, immediately after, I should say, and she told us her story and how that all went down, and it was fairly interesting. So please enjoy, and a couple of announcements before we start. Rate us on iTunes if you like the show; we would really appreciate it. If you're shopping on Amazon, use our Amazon link. You can find that on the show notes, on the episode notes. It'll be right there, or on our website on the donate page. The website is thegeneralistpodcast.com. You can follow us on Twitter at the Generalist PC. You can find our Facebook group. I think you just do at the Generalist Podcast, or you just look for the Generalist Podcast. I'm not entirely sure. Send me comments via email or questions at thegeneralistpodcast at gmail.com. And enjoy the episode. Whatever other announcements are necessary will be at the end. Welcome to The Generalist, a show with a man who knows very little bit about a lot. A man who specializes in nothing in particular. A man who knows that he knows nothing. A man who can be described as non-specific. And to top it off, he narrates his own intros. This is The Generalist with your host, Saul Ackerman. So we're here at The Generalist. We're with Fanny and I. She is a Cuban refugee who escaped Cuba in the year 1960. Right after Castro had come to power. How long had he been in power?
Less than a year, actually, because he came into Havana New Year 1959. I left September 1960.
Oh, so it was pretty early. I didn't realize how early it was. I thought he'd been in power a little bit already.
No, I knew that we were going to do something about it since the day he came in, because the big speech that he did on the Plaza de la Revolución. He made a speech and we were watching the speech and we were all thinking that it was the savior after Batista. And when my father heard the speech, he said, "Kids, we gotta go." And I said, "Why do you say that? It's going to be, now we won't have a dictatorship anymore." He said, "I was in Red Square when Lenin spoke, and this is just translated. So we better get ready to go."
So you guys were ready to go and you had the history.
Definitely.
All right, so tell us a little bit about Batista before Castro, because I feel like a lot of people are not familiar with Batista. They just know Castro and they don't know the history to it.
Yeah, well, Batista obviously was a dictator. The thing is that the first time that he was in power, I think I was just born or something like that, in 1930 something, he also was a dictator at that time. He was a colonel in the army. There was a lot of unrest in Cuba at that time, and he came into power and became a dictator. He was a dictator until I think 1944. I don't remember.
So
exactly.
Between Batista and Castro, there was
no. Then we had elections and we had two duly elected presidents. First it was Grau San Martin, who had his problems also, but he was a Republican government,
conservative, you mean?
No.
Or Republic,
Republicano.
Like a republic.
Yeah,
okay,
it was a republic. Then after that came Prio Socarrás, which was also elected, I don't remember the political parties really,
It doesn't necessarily
But what I mean is that he was a president who did a lot of good things. He instituted the National Bank. He was, you have to realize that Cuba was always very influenced by the American government. In those years, we used to think of the American government very interventionist. Now looking back, I'm not so sure. But anyway, we used to think that they came into Cuba for the against.
When the Spanish were in the Spanish-American War.
Spanish-American War. The story sort of like people used to think that they came in almost at the end. The Cubans were winning the war anyway, but they came in and intervened into the Cuban affairs because they thought it was thought that Cubans won the war because of the help of the United States, which may have been true. I am not so familiar with history myself. The thing is that after that, they were always very involved in the Cuban government. And in the Cuban, not involved in the Cuban government per se, but like
they had their own interests in Cuba,
that's what
which makes sense because strategically, it is a very important place for the United States
definitely.
to protect.
No, let me tell you, according to history, Cuba sent more money to Spain than all the other colonies together. But anyway, at the end, we had two really Republican governments. Prioso Carras was really supposedly doing a pretty good job, but there was always people who were not so happy. And again, according to some sources, they think that the United States was not too happy with the idea of a very independent Cuba from their American interest. There's always a very murky, how do you call it,
relationship.
It could have been, it could have not been, but at the end, there was this one guy, there was Communist Party, and there was a party of the Auténticos were very vociferous. There were a lot of parties in Cuba. Not like here, you only have the two main parties. But in Cuba, it was very fractured, the political environment. And at the end, I think that the Americans thought that Cuba was going to be too much independent politically. I don't think it was the American government per se, but the interest, we always used to accuse the United Fruit of being in.
The United Fruit was a company that imported fruits?
Yeah, it was supposed to be one of the biggest fruit. Today, even, I think they still are in business. I don't know, maybe not. But anyway, at the end of the thing, Batista, with a backing of the United States, became again a coup d'etat.
A coup, yeah.
And became a dictator. But it was I would say in the beginning it was like a benevolent dictatorship. Things were not so bad. Of course, dissidents were not so happy about it, but in general the economy was fine. People was getting along and all that. But human nature is greedy.
That is the Western philosophical thought, yeah.
And he became, every time it was more involved in things, and he became so involved in the economics of the country that it was choking the middle class economy and the economy of the country itself. So people, not only Castro was a communist, and as a communist he was against, of course, that, and he went on the mountains or whatever he was fighting, but he wasn't really the one who won the revolution against Batista. The reality was that the middle class, the students of the university, obviously also, not even the middle class, even the richer class, the people who were more affluent, they were also feeling choked. And there was a movement of the Catholics. A lot of people were against him because he was doing things for himself, not for the country. And the thing is that after he left, when he saw that he wasn't, and he left Cuba by himself, Castro came over, and people thought that he was, the savior. And at the beginning, people rallied around him, thinking that he was going to do. The man had been educated by the Jesuits. I mean, he was supposedly Catholic, and he came on with a crucifix in his hand. But at the end, when he started talking, and like I say, my father said, this is not what we think it is.
Interesting.
This is communism, and this is going to be bad. And he left 2 weeks later. He didn't even wait.
Oh, he didn't even wait. He just straight up and left.
He just got up and left. Left businesses, left his apartment, his house, everything. And he left. He came to the United States.
It's very interesting. People have a very hard time doing that. And it happens all over the world. And people go, no, I'm not going to leave until it gets really bad. But the smartest people seem to be always the ones who get out.
No, he said, you know, you don't get, and he taught me that from a long time also, you don't get tied to stones. Possessions are not what you get tied to.
I couldn't agree more.
You have to realize that your life, not just your life, but your well-being and your liberties and those are more important than material possessions. And you know, Israel was afterwards he was working for Castro.
So let me make it clear. Israel is her husband who passed away a few years ago. So tell me a little bit about that. How was he? Well, actually, even before he was working for Castro, I understand they went to university around the same time. They weren't necessarily friends.
With Castro.
Yeah.
Castro was a few years ahead of him. But still, he knew him from the university and all that. Israel was a civil engineer. He had
a world-renowned civil engineer.
Well, at the end he was, but at that time he was just a kid, 24 years old.
Right.
But he, after the university, he went to work with an engineer who was very renowned in Havana, and he was also a professor in the university. And he worked for him, and at that time, I mean, it was still Batista time, the mafia, the American mafia, started getting involved in Cuba and building hotels, and there was in Cuba there was always gambling.
It was legal, you're saying?
It was legal. No, but there was always a gambling
like going on constantly.
Going on, and the people who were involved in gambling or things like that. But when the American mafia came in, they started to
trying to build casinos.
They built the casinos, but to control all the gambling.
Right.
So they had one of the biggest hotels in the Nacional. There was a gambling area. In the nightclubs there was also gambling, and then they built new hotels that were also going to be gambling, and there was gambling in there. So when they started building a hotel that was called the Riviera, Israel was working with Sainz. The company that he was working was called Sainz, Cancio and Martin. And Sainz was the big engineer, and he was working with him, and he was involved in the design of the building. At that time, Sainz decided to associate himself with a firm of architects, and Israel didn't want to. He wanted to be independent of architects. He felt that if you are an engineering firm, you have to work with different architects, not just one.
I see.
So he went over and he resigned. When he resigned, the Riviera was still being built, and he became the American CEO, obviously.
The mob.
The mafia.
Yeah.
They offered him, actually I don't think it was the mafia itself, it was the architect who was involved, the American architect who was involved with the building. But they offered him a job as a owner's rep.
As a what, I'm sorry?
As an owner's representative.
Owner's representative, okay.
So he was sort of an inspector in the building, in the procedures. He worked, obviously it was very successful for him, that job. He met a lot of people, architects and builders and of course the mafiosi. And after that, he opened his own office and was designing buildings. In fact, when Castro came, they were designing a hotel that was going to be by a marina, and it was going to be called the Barlovento. There were a lot of Meyer Lansky. I don't know if Meyer Lansky was involved in that, but anyway, even Frank Sinatra, I think, was involved in that hotel. Yeah. But anyway, at that moment was when Castro came in. And Castro called him and
Called
said,
who?
Israel.
Okay.
And he said, we're going to build a hotel. You have the plans. We're going to go on and build it. And he said to him, are you going to allow gambling? He said, no, gambling is finished in Cuba. There's no more gambling here. And he said, well, I think that hotel is not going to be successful. No, we're going to do it and you'll see and whatever, but it didn't happen. I don't know if the hotel was ever built. We left already, obviously. But anyway, since there was no private building anymore, and all the people who had the money were leaving, he was recommended to be the head of the structural department in public works. So obviously he went into the government and he was working there. But anyway, he was the head of the Department of Public Works, and he had quite a few people under him. They were doing, I guess, roads and whatever. Of course, he was getting the department organized and all that. A little later, he was already about 4 or 5 months into the revolution. And one time he's walking on the street and he meets an American guy who had been working in the hotel. And this guy was when he was in the Riviera. This guy was in charge of the sound systems, all the sound systems in the hotel. So he meets in the middle of the street, and it was, there were not many Americans in Cuba at that time anymore. And he says, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Oh, I'm working for Castro." He says, "What do you mean you're working for Castro?" He said, "Yeah, I'm here, and but you know what? Let's walk around." And he says to him, "What do you mean walk around? Come on, let's go."
This is the guy who's saying "Let's walk around" is
the
American guy.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
So they go and they walk into the middle of a park. And he says, and he looks around and he says, "Okay, now we can talk." And he says, "What do you mean?" Israel said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, now when you want to talk to anybody, go into the middle of a park or someplace where you are far away from walls. Don't talk on the phone." And he said, "What's happening?" He says, "Well, I'm here because I have been hired to bug the places.
Wow.
Bug the buildings, bug the offices. Everything is there's going to be surveillance all over. So be careful what you say." Okay, so he went back to the office, and he went to the office of the minister, who was a friend of his. And his name was Manolo Ray at the time. So he went into the office and he says, "Hi Manolo, how are you?" "Oh, fine." And so, "Let's go have some coffee." Manolo says, "What do you mean you'll go out for coffee? I'm the minister. I can order coffee. They bring it any time." He says, No. Let's go have a little bit of fresh air. What do you want to be in this cooked up over here? Let's go out." Okay. So he says, okay, went out. They went out to the corner. In Cuba, in every corner, there was somebody selling coffee. He goes and they get their cup of coffee. They start walking. And he says, "Listen, did anybody fix your phone yesterday?" And he said, "Yeah, I don't know why. There was nothing wrong with it, but somebody came in and said they had to fix the phone." I said, "Well, your phone is bugged. So be careful what you say," and when anyway, 2 days later, Manolo Ray left Cuba.
I thought Manolo was about to tell him that that he was about to resign and that he just saved his life because he was about to say that by the bugs. No?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. That's how the story was told to me.
Yeah,
but
maybe
things get embellished.
Yeah, get embellished afterward. But anyway, maybe I don't remember. It's quite a few years back.
Of course.
But anyway, so Manolo left. Israel came home and said, "Your parents are in the States. You have a visa if you want to go visit, but the kids have no visa, no passport or anything. Maybe you should go and get passports for the children. And so I said, okay, not a bad idea. So
was it particularly difficult to leave Cuba at this time?
Not particularly difficult in the sense that there were barriers to leave, but there was a lot of people leaving. Everything was taking a long time for anything. You wanted the embassy, of course, was mobbed. There were lines around the American embassy for people trying to get visas. So I said, okay. So I went and I requested passport for the children. For some reason, it didn't take so long. In 2 weeks, I had the passports, and I was very happy about it. So anyway, I went to get the passports, and as I am walking out of the office, I see a friend of mine in the street, and she says, oh, again, what are you doing around here? It was not my usual surroundings. And I said, oh, I decided if I want to go see my parents in the States, I needed passport for the children. So, but now I'm going to have to go to the American embassy and make that tremendous line. So she says to me, oh, I have a friend that works in the American embassy. If you want, go over there and ask for so-and-so. I don't even remember the name. Maybe he can put you through. So immediately I went. I didn't even go home. I went to the American embassy. I go in. I say, I'm coming to see so-and-so. They let me through. I asked for him, and he looked at me. He looked at a clock that was hanging on the wall. It was like 10:30 or something like that. He says, well, it's a little late now, but you know what? Come tomorrow by 10 o'clock and I put you through the consul. I called my sister, who also had already a passport for her boy, and I said, let's go tomorrow. So we went, and sure enough, passed me through the consul. And the consul looks at me and he says, why do you want to go to the United States? I said, well, my father is there, my mother and father are there, and I want to go visit with my children.
Now, were at this time people suspicious? Like, if you would say that you wanted to leave, would it be a problem?
It would be a problem for Israel because he was working for the government.
I see, and they didn't want
government
people,
workers. But people. There were some. You needed some kind of exit visas to go out, from the government, and you had to request them. The thing is that they were not that organized yet. They were still young. It was still a young. So things were getting sort of tough, but were not really that tough. There were ways of, you could circumvent a little bit the situations. When I said that to the consul looked at me with a funny face and he says, oh, you want to go visit? I said, yeah, I'm coming back. He says, yeah. So anyway, he said, okay, and he gave me the stamps on the passports and I had the visa. And I was very proud of myself. You have to remember that at that time, I was 24 years old. I thought I was a great big deal. And I came home and I said to Israel with a big proud of myself, you see, you thought I was going to have so much trouble getting visas. I have the passports, I have visas, I have everything. So he says, okay, you're leaving in 2 weeks.
Wow.
So I said, what do you mean I'm leaving in 2 weeks? He says, get ready, you're leaving in 2 weeks, and you cannot go out and get a valise.
And get what?
A valise, a bag.
A bag, oh.
Any kind of bag, any kind of thing that you have to, for packing, you have to use whatever you have in the house. If you cannot fit whatever you have, you don't take it.
So he foresaw where the situation was going.
Of course, he was there.
Right.
He was inside, and he was seeing the way, every time he came home, he was telling stories about, how this happened and that happened. And you have to realize they had these trials going on. They were shooting people against the wall. They were
on the streets?
No.
They were just executing.
They were
executing
quote unquote, people who had, histories or whatever. There were executions all the time. There was people were in jail. People who had been involved with the Batista government were
were being killed.
Right and left, and the mock trials were really, I mean, you could see that they were
a joke.
Trumped up. No, they were trumped up charges and
exactly.
type of thing, So anyway, so he said, "You leave." I said, "What about you?" He said, "No, I cannot live without you. You have to live by yourself alone, and then with the kids, and then I'll see how I get myself out." And since he was involved with the government, there were conferences in Miami that he had to go, some kind of engineering thing. He was going back and forth. Besides, because he had clients that were American clients, because the Barlovento Hotel and all that were Americans, he used to go to Florida to collect money that was owed to him all the time.
I see.
So he had.
And were those projects private projects for him?
Yeah, they were private from before.
So he was still able to have private clients at that time.
Clients were private. The jobs were not really stopped yet. At that, some of them, but even if they were, they owed him the money, so he was coming to try to get paid. And every time that he got paid, he used to give those dollars into the Cuban bank. And at one time, even Che Guevara sent him a letter thanking him for bringing back dollars into the country.
Interesting.
Too bad I never saved that letter.
Yeah, that would probably sell for some money today.
Yeah.
So then how would he end up getting out of Cuba?
So that was another thing. In his department, there were people who were pro-Castro and there were people who were not. And they were having arguments in the office. In fact, one of the guys, they had blows. I mean, they were really fighting.
Fighting.
Yeah.
Just fighting. Wow.
Of course, he didn't want to say anything. And when he decided that he was going to leave, he went to the head of the personnel and he said to him, I'm having problems in my office. They're old friends of mine, all the guys that work for me. I really don't want to take sides. So maybe you should transfer me into another department and then put somebody else in charge of my department. So the guy was very happy because he knew that Israel was not really a Fidelista.
Which is somebody who is pro-Fidel Castro.
Pro-Fidel Castro.
And the guy who he's talking to was or was not?
Yes, he was.
He was
very open.
Oh, so he was happy that he was getting rid of these guys.
Yeah. So he says, "Oh, that's a very good idea. You know what? We are going to create a special department for you that you are going to investigate and inspect all the bridges through the island, because we want to make sure that all the bridges are in good condition, and you're going to have a whole new department for you." So Israel said, "Oh, that's a really great idea. But you know what? I've been working for over a year and I didn't have a vacation yet. Could you give me 2 weeks vacation before I start the new department?" He says, "Sure, of course. I'll have you'll have it in, I don't know, in a week or something like that." And he says to him, "What do you mean in a week? You can't give it to me right now?" He says, "Well, it has to go through the lines, through the...
it has to go through the bureaucracy.
To the bureaucracy. So he says, "Oh, if I was a chief of the department, it would be done in 2 minutes." And he said to him, he picked his pride. He said, "You'll have it in 2 hours, or in an hour or something like that." So the thing was that at that time, when they gave you vacation, it was not vacation that you could go anywhere. They gave you vacation for your area. You could stay in your house and be around your home. You could go on vacation within the
confines.
Province.
Within the province, I see.
Okay. So it meant that if you lived in Havana, you could go to the beach in Havana.
So you couldn't even leave your own province.
That's right.
Wow.
And then you could have vacation in what they called the national territory, that you could go anywhere in the island, and you could go on vacation outside of the national territory,
And I
meaning the
imagine
United States.
that was the hardest one to get.
Of course they did.
Yeah.
So anyway, they gave him, but at that time already, I had already left. It was about 2 weeks after I left, and they had already been closing down on people that they couldn't leave the country. So when they gave you the paper that you had vacation, they sent it to a department when they put a stamp of where you could go. So that's also a funny story. He had a friend in an area in the Department of Public, so one of these guys, his name was Armandito. And Armandito was this kind of guy that was always involved with everybody and knew everybody in every department, and he knew how to get things done.
A real social guy.
It's a real social guy. So he calls Armandito and he says, Armandito, the paper is going to go down, and I need the stamp that goes for the United States or out of the country. I don't need the other stamp. See what you can do about it. Of course, he goes downstairs, and the place was guarded by milicianos, or like
militia.
Some kind of militia, National Guard, or whatever you call it. And the guy was there, so Armandito couldn't do anything looking for the paper. So Armandito talks to a girl that was in the department, a very voluptuous, nice-looking girl, to entice the miliciano to go out for coffee. And she goes and does her stuff, and finally the miliciano goes out for her for coffee, and Armandito goes into the office, looks for the paper, puts a stamp, and takes it out.
Wow.
So anyway, when Israel got to the airport, of course they knew him there because he was always coming back and forth. And when they saw him and that he had the paper going out of the States, of Cuba, they said, "Oh, where are you going?" He says, "Oh, I'm going to get some more dollars to bring back," and that's when he left.
How was it for you while you were in the United States? Those 2 or 3 weeks waiting for him.
Well, when I came, one of Israel's uncles was in Miami at the time, and he was the one who picked me up and found the room for me. Again, my mother and father were here in the States, but they were in New York, not in Miami. My mother came down to Miami to help me out, and we were, my mother and everybody in one efficiency room in Miami.
When you say everybody, was that also your sister and her son?
No. My sister and her son had they had other problems. They didn't leave until a little later.
I see.
I mean, my sister didn't leave, I think, until November or December. And my brother-in-law had a lot of trouble getting out. It's a story for another
episode.
Another episode.
Okay.
Yeah. But that was it. And we came here, and again, Israel said that Miami was a feast of famine kind of market for his profession. And we came to New York, and that's where we stayed.
What did you guys bring from Cuba when you left?
I had, maybe 3 or 4 valises with me, bags with me. They were checking people going out of Cuba. If you had any electrical appliance, they would take it out. You were not allowed to take any kind of electrical appliance.
Why is that?
Because they were not importing anything from the States. So if you had an iron or whatever,
they wanted it to stay there.
They wanted to stay there. You couldn't take, of course, jewelry. They were kind of taking jewelry. They weren't checking that much, because I did take all my jewelry without any problem. But there was another thing. The day I left was the same day that Fidel Castro was leaving Havana to come to the United Nations for the first time after Batista. People would remember the episode in the Hotel Teresa with the chickens and all the thing. It was kind of, but anyway, he was leaving that same day. So they were so involved with him and security for him and all that,
That you got out a lot more easily.
they didn't check any of my bags or anything. They didn't check. But I didn't take any of my silverware. I had a lot of silverware. People were taking plates and everything.
Everything they
people
could
were
sneak
trying,
out.
you know, all kinds of things, because obviously you couldn't take money out. I left with $5.
Wow.
$5 for me and $5 for each of the kids. I don't think it was even enough for the taxi to go to from the airport. Money you couldn't take, and I didn't want to take any money because I was afraid if they checked. But they didn't check me or anything. I could have taken out anything, but I didn't.
Better safe than sorry, I suppose.
Yeah, obviously.
It seems to have turned out all right.
Yeah, I took clothing. I took sheets and pillowcases and towels, because I knew I wouldn't have any money to buy them here. So I took whatever I could take in that sense.
When you got here, you got refugee status?
Well, not really. Even though there were people getting refugee status, but after, when I came in a tourist visa. So when in the customs, when they asked me, I said I'm visiting my parents and I expect to be here just a month or two, maybe. I was not a refugee.
I see.
But when Israel came, he said that he wanted to stay here when they checked him, you know. Besides, his name, Seinuk, was in the Black Book. You know, there is a list of names that are suspicious to the country. So
in Cuba, you're talking about, not here.
No, here in the States.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Because his father had been president of the Zionist Union, a member of the Zionist Union, and he had been president of a few organizations, so his name was known. And the guy who was interviewing him obviously was not Jewish, didn't know what a Zionist Union was, and he thought it was a labor union. So Seinuk, he said, your name is Israel Seinuk? Yes. Do you know Haim Seinuk? He says, yes, that's my father. He says, he's a member of the Zionist Union. He said, yes. Then he said, why do you want to stay? I mean, do you want to have political asylum? So he said, because obviously he said he was working for the government. So he said, do you want to have political asylum? So he said, no. I would like to have political asylum, but the point is that at that time, whenever people got political asylum, those names were used to be published. And his parents were still in Cuba. So
right.
He didn't want his name published, that his parents could be harassed afterwards.
Right, of course.
So he said that's the reason. So they let him in the first day. They let him in on a provisional basis, and he had to go back for a hearing. And when he went back for the hearing, again they were talking about Zionist Union, and the guy who was interviewing was making a fuss about it. So there was another official walking by, and this official calls him in, comes over, he says, listen, do you know what the Zionist Union is? And he says, oh yeah, I'm Jewish, I know that. I'm also a member.
So what was the issue? Just because they didn't know that it was what they were afraid of it?
They thought it was a labor union.
I see.
People here were concerned about those kind of things. The United States has always been careful about people coming in.
Absolutely,
It's not something new.
Yeah.
At one point, it was terrible for the Jews, but
so going back to Cuba, and kind of rewinding back through time, it's unclear to me, but did Israel have any involvement in A, the underground movement with Castro against Batista, and B, the underground movement against Castro himself?
No, against Castro, no.
Against Castro, no? No involvement whatsoever?
No.
Oh,
no.
See?
Actually, well, afterwards when he left, before he left, actually, he wrote 2 letters of resignation. He wrote a letter to the university because at that time he was a professor, assistant professor in the University of Havana, a position that he gained by like a competition.
Like auditions almost.
No, but it was a competition. It was a few people
Oh,
that
I see. So they bring a bunch of people, and everybody has to
yeah,
take tests and do certain things.
yeah.
And,
So he was
got
chosen to be the professor. He was a professor, and of course, he was still working for the ministry. So he wrote a letter of resignation from the Ministry of Public Works, and he wrote a letter to the university, resigning from his post as professor. And those two letters, he gave them to our brother-in-law to mail them from a place not too close to our home.
Right.
We lived very close to each other. So my brother-in-law at the time, who was also working for the ministry, everybody was working, for the government at that time. He was working at la provincia de Pinal del Rio, which is the province next to the province of Havana, and he mailed a letter from there. So there was a group against Castro that was in that province.
They were based out of that
they
province.
They were based off of that province, so they thought that he was involved with them.
Oh, that's funny.
And they sent somebody to get him. Somebody who had been his
While
friend.
he was in New York.
Yeah, he was already in New York.
But they didn't know that?
No, they didn't know that.
Oh, so what? They sent an assassin or just somebody to get him?
No, they sent they made somebody captain of a militia group.
Oh, wow.
And this somebody was a friend of his.
Was he meant to be killed or just brought in?
I don't know.
We don't know.
That I don't know. But anyway, that was the involvement with Castro. No, but before, with Batista, I really don't know if he was involved or not, because in that sense he was always very protective of us, of the family. But obviously after Batista left, he was with a lot of people that were involved, that I knew. Even Manolo Ray had been involved. Manolo Ray was also
involved in what? In the fall of Batista?
In the fall of Batista, because this was people that, what I'm telling you, they were not the communists, they were the group from the Catholic Student Union and things like that were trying to overthrow Batista too. I don't know if he was actively involved with them, but afterwards I think that's why he was recommended for the job, maybe. I don't know.
Did you ever suspect that he had some sort of role in the underground? No.
No. Not before. Then afterwards, he used to go around to, in a jeep and things and going. Not that I know of. I mean, he never told me. Afterwards, before the Bay of Pigs, he was involved with Manolo Ray. Manolo Ray was also involved with the Bay of Pigs thing, and he was a supporter. Not that he went on training and he was going to go into the invasion, but he was a supporter of the group, and we met with them a few times.
That's interesting. Didn't you guys once get searched for weapons or something like that?
Yeah, but not because the building that we lived in, Fidel Castro lived in that building.
Oh, really?
His wife did anyway, his wife and child. He was already in the mountains. But the wife lived there, and the building was owned by the workers from the electric union, the electric company. The electric company in Cuba had a union, obviously. The workers were unionized. And the unions, like here, were very rich. They had a lot of money. So this building was owned by the union.
Right.
And the apartment that I lived in originally was the apartment from one of the biggies of the Communist Party. His name was Marinello. I don't know why he left the apartment. It was a very nice penthouse. And the one that had the apartment next door was one of the biggest from the union also, who the daughter happened to be a friend of mine, and we went to the university together. So the building was obviously watched. And at one point, there was an explosion in an electrical transformer that was not too far from the building. And of course, because the building was owned by the union and all this and that, the army came and searched the whole building for weapons.
Oh, right. So it wasn't specifically your apartment, it was the entire building.
No, it was the entire building.
I
But
see.
my father's store was also searched for weapons at one point.
Do you think your father had any involvement?
No, at that time it was Castro already in power.
Oh, I see.
But we probably had a delivery, and there were boxes outside. And when and somebody came and said that they wanted to search the building, the store, and they searched the store. And, Castro was, there was always somebody who would maybe give what they used to call a chivatazo.
Which means what?
A tip, police or whatever, and say, there's something going on there or something like that, and they didn't take
any chances.
They didn't take any chances. It was a way of also keeping everybody on their toes and in line. And the store, my father's store, at the time I was managing it already because he had left.
It was the first photography store in all of Cuba, correct?
Well, no, he was the biggest importer of photographic supplies after Kodak.
After Kodak? I thought he was Kodak.
No, Kodak. He used to have Kodak products, but no. No, he had a very good relationship with Kodak because he had been the first Kodak employee in Cuba when Kodak started in Cuba in the 30s.
Imagine, and now Kodak is, with the invention of digital photography,
it's gone, yeah.
It's basically nothing.
Yeah. We had 3 stores, a developing laboratory and a camera repair shop, and there was all kinds of things. But the store that I'm talking about that was searched was across from the Capitol building. So, it was also an area where
it's risky, yeah.
Was sort of risky.
So let me ask you this. What do you feel, or rather, do you feel that there was a portion of the population, even after Castro's government became more authoritarian, do you feel that there was still a portion of the population that was happy with him? Or do you think
Oh, yeah, of course. There was a portion, there was a lot of people who were happy with him. Economic equality or whatever, everybody has to have the same money. I remember a woman being interviewed on television, and she was living in a choza. How do you call it?
Choza is like a hut.
A hut, okay.
Yeah.
She was living in a hut, the poorest thing that you could ever think. And she was being interviewed if she was happy with Castro. And she was ecstatic. Of course, she was so happy. And they said to her, but you don't have anything. Castro hasn't given you anything that you didn't have before. And she said, yeah, but the rich people also lost everything, so they are in the same position as me. So I'm very happy about it.
Well, that's absurd.
It's absurd.
But I get the sentiment.
Sometimes that's the way people think, Saul.
Yeah, no, I do.
Because human nature, you cannot go against human nature. Well, there's always people who are going to be happy seeing everybody being unhappy.
This is true. Misery loves company is one of the things that people say.
So it's not but obviously, in the beginning, there was a lot of people that was with Castro.
In the beginning, it's a different story because people were thinking there was going to be something positive happening. But
but then what happens is, it comes a point where you get when you get control, afterwards it's very hard to get rid of that control.
Of course, once you give power away, it's impossible to get back.
But this is one thing that happens. In the beginning, there was a lot of people who were not involved in it. They were not communists. They were not involved with Castro himself. There were other entities that were against Batista. But when it came the time to elect, let's put it that way, in the unions, for example.
I just want to be clear. She just made air quotes when she said the word elect. Go on.
In the unions, it was time to elect the new union representatives. Okay, So the union, the election was called for giving a time at 7 o'clock. By 6 o'clock, all the communist sympathizers were there, and they filled the place. When the guys that were called thought that the election was going to be at 7 and they started coming in, there was no place for them. And they wouldn't be let in.
So there were other people that were going to be the potential leaders other than Fidel?
Of course.
I did not know that was the case.
No,
I thought Fidel was the leader.
I mean, other than Fidel, I don't know. Because obviously he had, there was different things. But I'm talking not of the highest levels. I'm talking of the low level, because things don't start at the high. Things start from the low. I'm talking at the low levels of leadership. When it comes to the unions, in the worker unions in the different departments of the country. I mean, the people who work for the electric company, the people who work for the telephone company, the people who worked for the union of the drivers. Or
right,
the
you're
union.
saying they were largely supportive of Castro?
They were supportive of Castro, but they were not really so. They were supportive of getting rid of Batista, but not all of them were supportive of Castro.
Right, so that's what I'm asking you. Was there a...
But then when when the elections for these unions came, the Castro people were filled the areas where because the elections were like what you call here caucuses or something. They had to be in a hall, and
town
they
hall
were in like a town hall type of thing. So they had their people fill the place and elect their own people. They left the other people out.
Oh, I see.
So those little by little they kept going up in the leadership ladder and coping all the important places.
Right.
And that's how they took control of the government. Then Castro was making a speech. He came out and says, why do we need arms? People don't need to have arms in their houses. So if anybody who had a gun had to go and give up the gun. If they found you with a gun, you were a contra-revolutionary, and they would shoot you. So at the end, the people who were against him were powerless.
Right.
And most of the people left. Anybody who had anything, if you had a store, it was taken. I remember one of Israel's uncles had a little store, used to sell dress materials. And he was a sympathizer of the communist idea. And when Castro came in, he took over all the big stores. The big department stores were all nationalized.
Right.
So he was very happy. You see, now they nationalized the big stores, and us, the little people, are going to be able to do business.
You're still competing against them, though, aren't you? You're
just
different owner.
But 2 weeks later, they nationalized the little people.
Oh,
They took away his store also.
How did he feel about it then?
He left Cuba, obviously.
Right.
He left the country. But what I mean is that, they start on one side and they go down the ladder.
As the saying goes, power corrupts absolutely. I mean, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Obviously. And he lost the store.
Do you want to pick that up? Oh, no, it's okay.
No, that's okay.
Okay, so now let's move back to the United States. Once you guys got here, you moved to New York. How was that for you guys? Was that difficult? Did you guys...
Yeah, well, at that time, my mother and father were here. We moved into their apartment. Afterwards, when my sister came, she lived in the same apartment. So there was a 2-bedroom apartment with, 6 people and 3 children, 6 grown-ups and 3 children.
In a 2-bedroom?
In a 2-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
We had 1 bedroom. My sister had another bedroom. My mother and father slept in the living room. And then we always had guests, because other people who were here from the family, my brother-in-law's family or things like that, or somebody would come and stay for dinner and sleep over. So we used to take off one of the mattresses from one bedroom, put it on the floor, and say they slept on the floor.
Wow.
A cousin that came was studying here in New York. Also, she was also from Cuba. She lived with us for a few months, and she was in the foyer. We had a sofa in the foyer that she slept on.
Wow.
Everybody was in one apartment. Then afterwards, Israel got a job.
How'd he get a job?
That's another story. There is an organization here called HIAS, Hebrew Association for Immigrants, something. It's some kind
I'm
of.
sorry, I'm laughing because you did the whole thing and the last letter was S and you said something, so it matches perfectly.
Yeah. No, I don't remember. I don't know what the letters really stand for.
That's fine.
But it's a kind of organization. I think it was funded by UJA or something. I don't know. That helps Jewish immigrants. So when we came to New York, he went there and told, of course, the story, and they get businesses that they can call and see if they can find you a job. So he went with a friend of his, actually another engineer that came at more or less at the same time, and they went there to ask to see if they could get help. So they gave him. There was one company, engineering company, called Kessler and Company. I don't know if they still exist. They offered an interview there, so they gave them both to go there for the interview. His friend David had the interview at 9 o'clock, and Israel had the interview at 9:30 or 10, something like that. So he goes there. He goes for the interview at 10 o'clock, and they give him the job. So he says, "Oh, they must have a lot of work because."
They both got jobs?
No, what happened was David fell asleep and never showed up.
That worked out well for
And
him.
let me tell you, after that, it took him about 6 months to find a job. The job market at that time was not that great for engineers. But anyway, he was working there for about 3 months, and he didn't like the place too much, and he thought that the type of buildings that they did was not what he liked to do. And it was a family-owned business. He realized that he would never get ahead there and all that. So he started looking for another job, and he saw an ad in the paper for Abrahams, Hertzberg, and Cantor. And he applied for the job, and the guy who interviewed him, Mr. Cantor, was a little hesitant of hiring him because he was coming from Kessler, who apparently didn't have such a great reputation. But anyway, he did give him a job, and that's where he stayed for the rest of his life, actually.
And that company eventually became Cantor Sanuk. Eventually, he was the sole owner of it.
At the end, yeah. At the end they were.
They were partners. That's right.
He had partners. He became partner with Cantor.
Right.
It was the office of R&G Cantor, and he opened his own office. He opened
A secondary office.
A secondary office by YAS,
which are his
Israel,
initials.
yes, and that other office was a minority-owned office because he was obviously a minority, and there were advantages for being a minority. There still are, and
a lot of his hires were minorities as well.
Yeah, but because on engineering, unfortunately, here the Americans like to be electrical engineers, or there's not too many civil engineers graduating here.
Interesting.
But civil and structural, But anyway, that has nothing to do with it. That he had quite a few Americans, and also a lot of from other. At what point I think he had people from 30 different countries in the office.
Wow, that's great.
Since there was the YAS Israeli Seinuk concern and the R&G Cantor, they formed like a parent company that was called the Cantor Seinuk Group.
I see.
Then afterwards, they were bought out by English conglomerate, and today I think the company is owned by a Canadian conglomerate. I don't know. Those things go through different changes.
Did Israel continue his teaching career in the United States?
He was a teacher at the university in Cuba Union. He was the head of the structural department in the School of Architecture. He always liked to teach architects.
Why is that?
Because he said that they were really artists. Architects were a lot more imaginative. Engineers are more structured, more,
It's a funny thing
dull.
for an engineer to say.
Yeah, well, but he was a free spirit.
Yes, indeed he was.
He was a teacher there for, I don't know, over 30 years.
Wasn't he the dean of architecture at one point in time?
Well, he was, when the dean of the School of Architecture passed away, he became like interim dean meanwhile but he didn't like the politics involved in being a dean, so at the end he didn't, they hired somebody else to be the dean.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, Israel was a world-renowned engineer. A world-renowned engineer. And he was also featured in Time magazine as one of the 25 most influential foreigners? Is that the word?
Latins.
Oh, 25 most influential Latin Americans in the United States or in the world?
In the United States.
In the United States.
The 25 more influential in the United States. Yeah, and he was a member of there was a European Commission on Terrorism that the engineers were devising ways of protecting the buildings against, that was after 9/11, obviously.
Right.
Protecting the building from something like what happened in 9/11 or what happened that time that there was some sort of bomb in Oklahoma? I don't remember.
Yeah, the Oklahoma bombing.
Yeah. So he was a member of that commission in Europe because he also built all over the world, and he had offices in London at that time, and he was called to be a member of that commission. He was always very
savvy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a very savvy man. All right, I think that's a good place to end it. Thank you so much for doing this.
Okay. I hope I didn't ramble too much.
That's kind of the point here. So you can ramble all you want. That's what we're doing. If you don't ramble, then I don't have an episode. All right. Thank you so much. This is the Generalist, or este es el Generalista. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. It was a great episode to record as usual. This was actually the second episode we recorded. So if there was any audio or anything weird that wasn't English. So if there was any weird audio stuff, that was due to that. We're continuing to record. We have a couple left that we recorded at the first verse, and now we're starting to record again more episodes. Next week I will probably be releasing an episode entitled something along the lines of Wall Street Culture, where I sat down with two friends, one of which works in the financial world, another who is a trainer and is in a band, and we kind of contrasted those views and talked about that stuff. If I recall correctly, it's been a while since we recorded it, but it was a lot of fun to record, and I'll tell you more about how that happened and how we ended up recording at the beginning of next week's episode. Otherwise, check us out on Twitter, The Generalist PC, shop through our Amazon link located on our website at the donate page or below the show notes. Follow us on Twitter at The Generalist PC. Follow us on Instagram at The Generalist Podcast. Facebook, same shit. What else we got? Email thegeneralistpodcast@gmail.com. It's really simple. Everything's The Generalist Podcast at whatever, except for what's it called? Twitter, because I couldn't fit podcast, so it's just PC. Anyway, thanks so much for listening. Have a good night, guys. Enjoy.